Good morning and afternoon to everybody. Joining from around the globe, the virtual 2020 Catholic Immigrant Integration Initiative Conference hosted by the Center of Migration Studies and the University of Notre Dame. Our session is titled Community Sponsorship Models for Immigrant Integration in Europe and North America, Challenges and Opportunities. My name is Ilaria Schnyder from Wartensee. I'm the Program Research Assistant Professor at the Kellogg Institute for International Studies at the University of Notre Dame. In the past 3 years, I've been working in studying refugees and migrants. In particular, in 2018, I have started a collaboration with Caritas Italy in evaluating the integration experience of a group of refugees arrived from Ethiopia to Italy through the humanitarian corridors. I'm very grateful that Oliviero Forti from Caritas Italy is with us today. In September 2016, the UN General Assembly adopted the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants, developing a global compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. The Global Compact recommends complementary pathways, such as community-based and private sponsorship schemes, to increase asylum seekers and refugees' access to third countries. Civil society, particularly through faith-based organizations, have been at the forefront in realizing the Compact's recommendations. Community-based private sponsorship models offer legal entry and protection with settlement support, using private means in which governments facilitate the legal admission of refugees. Faith-based organizations are often first responders to refugees due to their presence within local territories as well as at the borders. They are responsible for supporting the welcoming as well the integration process. Today, we will discuss about these efforts together with our exceptional international panelists. I'm very pleased to introduce them in the order they will speak. Deacon Rudy Ovcjak is the director of the Archdiocese of Toronto's Office for Refugees, Canada's largest sponsorship agreement holder. These archdiocese office sponsors hundreds of refugees each year and assists them with their settlement to Canada. Deacon Rudy began his career in the private sector. In 2010, he was ordained as a Roman Catholic deacon and is a member of the Finance and Audit Committee for the International Catholic Migration Commission. Our second speaker is Oliviero Forti. He is the head of the Migration Policies and International Protection Department in Caritas Italy. For about 20 years, he has been involved in migration-related issues, first as a researcher and later as professional. At the international level, he worked at the constitution of the European Migration Network for the European Commission. Now is involved in opening legal and safe pathways from the Horn of Africa, Middle East, Turkey, and Jordan. William Bill Canny is our third panelist, is the Executive Director of the Department of Migration and Refugee Services at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Mr. Canny brings experience of over 25 years of service to the Catholic Church and to refugees and migrants through his previous positions at Catholic Relief Services and the International Catholic Migration Commission. And last but not least, Father Pat Murphy, who is currently in his 7th year as a director of the Casa del Migrante in Tijuana, a house for 150 migrants and refugees. He did his studies in New York, Chicago, and Toronto. Father Pat has been a member of the Missionaries of St. Charles, the Scalabrinians, since 1976. He was ordained as a priest in 1980, and since then, he did his ministry in many Hispanic communities in places like Chicago, Los Angeles, and Kansas City. I will start now with asking a few questions to our panelists, who they will have about 8 minutes to provide an opening statement. So the questions are, can you give us an overview of the work you're doing in your respective countries, especially through private sponsorship models in Canada and in Italy and in Europe in general? What are the current challenges and perspectives, especially now in these uncertain times? And what does it mean to build communities of belonging? What are the issues, implications at the border right now? I'll start with Deacon Rudy. The floor is yours.
Ilaria, thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this forum. It's a privilege for me to be actively involved in refugee resettlement work that the church is doing here in Toronto, and a joy for me to be able to share about the work that we do. But I think it probably makes sense to set the table first to provide a high-level overview of Canada's refugee resettlement program. And so that we understand where the church plays a role in this program. We have in Canada 2 primary programs under refugee resettlement. The first is one that the government oversees and funds, where the government selects the refugee, they fully fund and are responsible for the settlement, for the refugee settlement during their first year of arrival to Canada. The second is the private sponsorship of refugees program. And this is a very unique model in the world where the private sponsor names the refugees. So we get a chance to select the refugees that we sponsor, but we also fully fund and are responsible to journey, to accompany, and to settle the refugee during their first 12 months of arrival to Canada. And it's in the PSR program, the private sponsorship of refugees program, in which the church functions. The PSR program, it is an absolutely beautiful program. It was created here in Canada 41 years ago in response to the Indochina refugee crisis. It does not receive any government support. It leverages, and this is the beauty of it, it leverages the time, talent, and treasure of regular Canadian citizens and permanent residents and civil society organizations, principally Christian churches, to journey and to sponsor refugees. And over the course of the last 41 years, private sponsors have resettled to Canada well over 325,000 refugees. Just remarkable program. So within the PSR program, we have 3 sub-programs. The largest of these, as you mentioned, is the sponsorship agreement holder stream, in which there's about 125 organizations across Canada that have signed an agreement with the Canadian government that allows them to sponsor refugees that they have named. And ORAT, as you remarked in the introduction, is the largest of these sponsorship agreement holders. Our office was reconstituted in 2009 as a department of the Chancery, and we have resettled since then about 5,000 refugees to Canada. And I look at that number, and while it may seem like an insignificant number in the context of the global refugee crisis, you know, we have 26 million refugees worldwide today, but it is in context of Canada, it is a large number. It is like resettling a small town to Canada. And the cost of this is not insignificant. Immigration Canada, the federal government determines the level of financial support that we are to provide a refugee when they arrive to Canada during their first 12 months. And in today's terms, the cost of settling these 5,000 refugees is in the ballpark of about $60 million. That is not an insignificant amount. And it doesn't include the cost of staffing this office and other expenses in running this office. And so this is a testimony to the vision, the care and concern of refugees of our Archbishop, His Eminence Thomas Cardinal Collins. He formed this or brought this as a chancery department back in 2009 in response to the Iraqi refugee crisis. And so here's a little bit of the work that we do. We collaborate with various Eastern Rite and Orthodox churches that have been particularly affected by the global refugee crisis, and we assist their members of the community who have family members still overseas that are in need of refugee resettlement. So there's a beautiful collaboration, almost in a very much an ecumenical perspective or dimension to this work. We also collaborate with roughly about 225 parishes across the Archdiocese of Toronto. And when the office was formed as a Chancery Department in 2009, the Cardinal, and this was at the height of the Iraqi refugee crisis, the Cardinal made an appeal to parishes saying, would you be part of the solution? And 160 parishes raised their hands and said, we want to sponsor a family. And that beautiful reflection of the work and the love that the church has for the vulnerable. We also conduct overseas missions where we meet with refugees and where we select refugees that we wish to sponsor. And it is, once we do that work, it is the parishes, our parishes, that are the hands and feet that actually do the hard work of journeying with those refugees after their arrival to Canada. In terms of what are the challenges that we face, what are the big issues is that, and this goes back to, I think, the issue of Christian persecution that we see in the world today. And it is, by all standards, a huge issue. The Christian community they are the most persecuted community in the world today. And so we have a prioritization. We actually prioritize Christians in our resettlement work. They are by no means represent all of the refugees that we settle, but we have prioritized them in light of the level of Christian persecution. And in light of the fact that the persecution of Christians is largely ignored in the West. And I hope that this is the topic that we explore a little bit further in this forum. The other issues that we are struggling with and dealing with Immigration Canada that are really of profound importance to us is the high cost of sponsorship. So our ability to settle refugees is fully at our cost. And so in 2018, the Canadian government made significant increases to the cost of sponsorship. And this really became, and the reason that this is so important is that this became a real impediment to co-sponsors who wish to sponsor their family members overseas who are in need of refugee resettlement. And it is those co-sponsors, they themselves are recent immigrants themselves. So this huge financial increase in the cost of sponsorship has really created a huge obstacle for them. And I think I'm nearing the end of my time here, so I'll end with this final.
30 seconds.
I'll end with this final concern that we have is the monitoring and compliance work that the government has recently undertaken. In 2019, Immigration Canada began to proactively interview refugees that we have sponsored and all the SAWs have sponsored to determine if the correct level of financial support and other support was being provided to them. The use of telephone survey methodology relied on the recall of the respondent. And if the SAW or the sponsor was deemed to be $1 short of the proper financial support or $10,000 short, it didn't matter. It required a huge undertaking of the SAW to the SEH to actually prove that sufficient financial support was being provided. And the key issue that this created for us is it created a crisis for the SAW community. Some determined that they were no longer participating in the program. Others said that they would decrease their participation. Others said that they would take legal or political action. So that's in a nutshell, a little bit of a glimpse into the private sponsorship of refugees program in Canada.
Thank you so much, Deacon Rudy. We are gonna go back to what you just said about the costs and the, also interfaith collaboration that is at stake in these projects. So I now give the floor to Oliviero Forti, Caritas Italy, to explain what is happening in Italy and in Europe in these days. Thank you, Oliviero.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this very important panel, Ilaria. And you know, but probably it's interesting for our panelists to know that Caritas Italiana, Caritas Italy, is deeply involved in implementing complementary pathways. As you said, since 2017, we started with the Italian government to organize several programs for refugees in Africa and the Middle East, in particular in Libya, Ethiopia, Niger, Jordan, and Turkey, from where Caritas Italiana is transferring these people, refugees. All these programs have the same aim, but are shaped in a different way. At the moment, we are working on 4 diverse programs. The first one is humanitarian evacuation. Through this program, it has been possible to operate in Libya, from where Caritas Italiana with UNHCR, who is the main partner for Caritas Italiana in this kind of program, organized the departure of refugees stuck in the Libyan jails. Probably you know the situation of these people in this North African country, the terrible situation they are facing now. The second program is the Resettlement program. And with UNHCR, through this program, we gave the opportunity to refugees with health problems to move from Jordan to Italy. In particular, these people lived in a Zaatari camp at the border with Syria. The third program is the main program from Caritas Italy at the moment, and is the humanitarian corridor. Through the humanitarian corridor, Caritas Italy is selecting and moving thousands of vulnerable refugees from third countries to Italy. The next corridor will be at the end of October of this month from Niger, where 50 people are waiting since February 2020, when Italian government, due to the COVID situation, didn't allow the departure. The last program is very recent, is the Unicorn program. It is a new kind of corridor implemented with UNHCR and several Italian universities. At the end of September, 20 refugee students arrived in Italy from Ethiopia. They will study in our country for 2 years. So the role of Caritas Italy in all these programs is to select, transfer, and welcome the refugees in Italy with the support of local communities. Everything is financed by Italian Church, who is investing many resources, until now more or less 10 million euros, in order to implement these alternative pathways without any direct support from institutions. The aim of this program is not only to give a chance to refugees, but mainly to sensitize the communities, in particular Christian communities, on the value of solidarity, as Pope Francis asked in 2015. If you remember, Holy Father called on every Catholic parish, convent, monastery, and sanctuary in Europe to shelter a family and asked bishops throughout Europe to use their dioceses to do the same. Through the humanitarian corridor programs, we want to bear testimony on the condition of refugees, people in need who live in least developed countries in very bad conditions. This way, we can help our community to understand the complexity of the phenomenon and the urgent need of millions, as before my colleague said, of people stuck in many underdeveloped countries, encouraging a new narrative on migration. In order to guarantee a positive approach to the issue of migration, it is necessary to prepare the host societies by ensuring their direct involvement. We have to promote a reception and integration system inspired by subsidiarity, thus contributing to prevent its institutionalization, which does not guarantee good results in terms of inclusion due to the lack of a direct link with the society. For this reason, we are looking with great interest at the Canadian experience of community sponsorship, who is very close to our idea of how to implement a humanitarian program as resettlement or other complementary pathways. Sharing responsibility mechanisms through which institutions and private associations put together resources and skills for selecting and welcoming refugees is the key issue. Moreover, promoting safe and legal pathways is one of the best ways to fight the traffickers, who is one of the main problems for us here in Europe, and in particular for the South European countries. Through this mechanism, it's possible to go beyond security and immigration link, very common in a contemporary European narrative. This program can be the best way to re-establish a positive relationship between the civil society and the governments on migration issues. For sure, these private programs cannot replace the general responsibility of the government for the implementation of a system able to safeguard and receive thousands of refugees. But they can open a new vision on migration in Europe. More solidarity, less barriers. Thanks to the contribution of Notre University, Caritas Italy is monitoring the experience of the humanitarian corridor program. We are understanding that the opportunity to have a community around this person grows very positive integration. Thank you, Ilaria.
Thank you, Oliviero. And we're gonna now give the floor to Bill Canny for the experience in the US.
Thank you, Ilaria. Greetings, friends. My goal in these brief remarks is to develop for you an understanding of the past and current community sponsorship initiatives in the United States. I note that communities, including Catholic communities, have been sponsoring newcomers for decades. Specifically, just after World War II, in 1948, over 100 dioceses, upon request from the Bishops' Conference, set up resettlement programs for survivors of the war, particularly from Europe. The agreement at the time between primarily churches and the government was that while the US government paid transportation to the United States, the receiving church and community guaranteed housing and employment. This turned out to be a tremendous effort by communities and churches across the country and laid the foundation for the current resettlement system. Since then, with regards to refugee resettlement, the State Department and 9 agencies are primarily responsible for resettling refugees, with community participation being a critical component of the program. In fact, such participation is counted and agencies are scored on this aspect of the program. Migration and Refugee Services, where I work, is part of an organization called Refugee Council USA. And I encourage you to visit their website, Refugee Council USA, as there are many resources on community sponsorship in the United States. So what is community sponsorship? We define community sponsorship as when a group commits to provide financial and/or in-kind support and certain volunteer services to previously or newly arrived refugees, asylees, asylum seekers, or other forcibly displaced persons. You will remember that the Syrian refugee crisis brought on an outpouring of community concern for refugees and a move in the US and European countries to welcome tens of thousands of Syrians. The telephones and emails of the 9 resettlement agencies, including our own, were flooded with requests from citizens and communities asking how they could help. While the outpouring of concern was amazing, it was blunted by decisions in the US to cut back refugee resettlement, and we actually do not know how we would have harnessed that sponsorship energy. The 9 agencies and some consultants did, however, hold a day-long meeting with information brought from a designated study group and look specifically at designing a Canadian-like community sponsorship model. We wanted it to be supplementary to the current program. We looked at a 5,000-person pilot. A couple of obstacles to the model in the United States are, one, every refugee would still need to go through the extensive multi-year vetting system. And secondly, healthcare premiums are very high in this country, and it seemed challenging for community groups to pay those premiums for a period until the refugee family could acquire their own healthcare. The debate became a bit moot as the Trump administration began to slash refugee arrivals, and the initiative was actually shelved by our group. Nonetheless, the Migration Policy Institute began a study and published it in 2019 called Volunteers and Sponsors, a Catalyst for Integration, ? It's an excellent publication, and I recommend you take a look at it on the Migration and Policy Institute website. One of the concerns we all have is how to go about advocacy at the local level. We tend to know the game at the national and state level, but there are some ties between advocacy and community sponsorship of uprooted migrants. Accompanying migrants in accessing local services, resources, and education will support them in long-term integration and is a vital pillar of advocacy, particularly in a climate where there is a growing push for policies that marginalize migrants and cut back on traditional support. When energy and skills of volunteers or sponsors are harnessed, we advance toward inclusivity and a spirit of welcome in our local communities. As the Stanford Social Innovation Project states, there is an increase in appreciation of each other's humanity, both the newcomer and the long-term resident. This is the type of bridge building on a micro level that is needed to counteract the rhetoric of division and reminds us of what brings us together. Let's take a few moments to remember what it takes to build and sustain volunteerism and community sponsorship in our parishes and community groups. Some organizations struggle with utilizing the time and resources brought upon by volunteers and sponsors. It's not an easy undertaking. Engaging volunteers, one has to remember, is not cost-free for resettlement and migrant support agencies. Most effective programs have a volunteer coordinator, ideally full-time. They also provide provision of training and oversight to volunteers. We have at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops a program called POWER, which awards about $20,000 to 20 agencies who participate each year in our refugee resettlement program. The money is to not just help refugees, but also asylum seekers and other immigrants. I note that the majority of power sites, dioceses, and Catholic charities use the award to engage a volunteer coordinator because they know how important it is to the success of the program. We also sponsor another program in a few dioceses, which takes a slightly different approach to protection and support for newcomers. The CARE program, Catholic Accompaniment and Reflection Experience. This program aims specifically to accompany and be in solidarity with undocumented migrants and their families, while they comply with immigration proceedings, such as ICE check-ins, as well as to support further community interaction with migrants at the parish and local community level. I do want to point out that while our borders have been relatively closed in recent years to asylum seekers, we necessarily have to accept the right of people to seek asylum at our borders and our legal responsibility to offer them the opportunity. As our immigration court proceedings remain slow, asylum seekers necessarily enter the country and are either detained or allowed to go live with families and friends. I hope that in the future we will have fewer asylum seekers detained in prison-like conditions and as an alternative allowed to live in our communities during their immigration proceedings. However, they need support. They also have human needs, and we should not give them those needs to being met by chance or not at all. The federal government, along with local government and communities, need to devise cost-effective support systems for asylum seekers in this country. Again, I offer a visit to the Refugee Council USA website to read about programs of community sponsorship offered by Church World Service and Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. Amnesty International had an initiative called The Long Table, and currently a number of funders have come together to launch the Community Sponsorship Catalyst Fund. Through this fund, a successful applicant may receive a grant of up to $50,000 per year for 2 years to support the creation or enhancement of a community sponsorship program. This is evidence that the ideas that came forward in 2016 and models such as those in Canada are still alive and well and being both discussed and seeking implementation in the US context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. And I'll give the floor now to Father Pat.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity. Well, 8 minutes is like a good sermon, so I'll try to get to the point. Building a community of belonging. What are we living? What has happened? Well, just a little history. The Casa opened in 1987. We've been here for 33 years. We've served 270,000 people. A small city has come through our doors. And one thing we've learned is to adapt. I like to think we're like chameleons. We change our colors according to the situation at our front door. I think if you came here October 2nd, 2019, you would walk into the Casa and see 120 men, mostly 90% deportees. If you walk into the Casa today, you'll see 60 people, mostly families, mostly from Central America, some Africans, who are hoping that they'll be able to get asylum in the United States. They're mostly family, so we had to adapt and change. So we have 17 kids in the Casa. We have 4 babies under the age of 1. So I constantly feel like the grandfather of a lot of kids. We offer them basically a safe place to stay. Last March, when the COVID crisis came in full bloom, we decided to close the Casa for a while. It ended up being 3 months. We invited people who wanted to stay here, and we would protect them. And about 30 people stayed. In June, we started opening the doors once again in a very slow and precautious way. We have a doctor here 3 times a week, and those are the 3 days, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, that we accept people. And he will give them a little checkup to make sure they're looking okay. We have a questionnaire we fill out, and then they could come in and be part of the family. We have a staff of 20 and a group of 5 full-time volunteers who live in community with me and work really hard to keep the Casa going. Ours is a holistic approach, a model of integral formation in every sense. So the 3 main focuses right now is to offer refugees through our Office of Refugee Protection, working with the United Nations who are funding the project, a full-time lawyer, full-time psychologist, who try to walk with each case, not only here, but in 5 other casas in Tijuana. Right now, if you don't live here, a lot of the follow-up is by phone or sometimes an interview at the front door. So we're trying to do our best given the environment which we're in. The Casa itself has a staff that includes a full-time psychologist, a lawyer, a department of work. There's a lot of work in Tijuana, so we were able to find jobs for many people in the formal and informal economy. And the third thing of our goal is to offer our guests a chance at a new life. You know, everybody shows up at the front door and they're thinking, American dream, American dream. And then when they begin to hear about it, some of them come to realize that it's the American nightmare to be able to cross the border. So we try to sometimes offer them the opportunity of the Mexican dream. Mexico's not perfect, Tijuana's not perfect, a lot of violence, but there's also a lot of work. So people can start a new life here if they wish. We are learning to live with the virus. We are not going to live in fear, but in hope. We take precautions. We try to keep people safe. And sometimes, you know, the use of washing hands, gel, bacterial gel, disinfectant mats, taking temperature. We've even programmed all the kids. You know, it's a challenge to get a 6-year-old to keep a mask on, but we try. And they know it's important. They're all excellent hand washers. They're willing to teach anybody who needs to learn. We find a case that's suspicious. They go into strict isolation, and we give them 10 days, 14 days, depending on the case. Sometimes people don't accept this. And so then we have to say, well, you have to find another place to stay because we have to protect the people. We also have begun to give away over several months, 70 to 80 meals in styrofoam containers at the front door of the Casa every day. Most of these are former migrants who lived at the house and they're still working, they're still paying rent, but we give them this extra help to get things going in their life. One of our very big dreams right now is a project we started about 3 years ago called the Scalabrini Center for Formation of Migrants. So we're building a trade school. It's not a small building. It's a 3-story building with 6 classrooms in which people will be able to have all sorts of classes there: electricity, literacy, English, Spanish, carpentry. We're still forming the curriculum, but the classes have already started here in the Casa in a very small way. So we have 10 people studying English. We're going to have 12 people studying electricity. Why do we do this? Because we believe education is the key to helping people get a new life, to have new hope. We people arrive at the door who can't even sign their name. So sometimes we have to start on a very basic level. Our goal is always to help people to do better. Our goal is that when people come into the Casa and they stay, they'll leave and they'll feel better about themselves and leave as better people. The movement of the Casa is you could stay for 40 days. If you're working, we have a kind of a safe deposit box system where we could save your money. And then when you're ready, in hopefully less than 40 days, you go out and rent, you start your new life, and you can still bring your kids back, and we'll take care of your kids during the day while you're working, and you can still receive food. So we have this huge extended family, and things seem to function real well. I just want to conclude by talking about 4 issues or challenges that are facing us here at the border. One is that people keep coming. Every day somebody shows up at the door. In spite of COVID, you know, they're coming from situations of violence. Most people show up here, they've had some member of their family killed. So what is COVID to them? It's just another threat to their life, but they keep showing up because they need to escape their situation. Number 2, the governments are not helping. Obviously, President Trump doesn't help anything when it comes to terms of migrants. The only help he gives is he's paying Mexico, and this is a secret, but it's no longer a secret. They have a 3,000 person shelter in Tijuana that's funded by US dollars. So that's kind of the stay in Mexico program. Stay at home and just don't bother us. Mexican government's not any better. Our President AMLO, I don't know in what world he lives, but it's not in the real world. He's taken away all financial support to every Casa de Migrante in Mexico. So there is no financial support from Mexico either. Number 3, the possibility of asylum in the border here is non-existent. People come here and, you know, we tell them there is no asylum for this year. And they just can't believe it because they get so much misinformation. So what happens? All along the northern border of Mexico and US, there are thousands and thousands of people. And lastly, new caravans are forming every day. In fact, as we speak, the last 2 days, a new caravan of 3,000 people has assembled in Honduras. And we expect that more people are going to try. This time they're not getting any support from anybody, but they're desperate and they keep moving. So there's a lot to be done at the border. There's a lot of great needs. And I thank you for listening. And if you want to, you can find us on our Facebook, Casa de Migrante, and see all the sorts of good things that we're doing to save people's lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Father Pat, for sharing what is happening right now at the border and the challenges that you are living there. I welcome questions from the public, from the audience. If I saw there is one that I'm gonna post right now, but if there are any other question you want to ask our panelists, please do it. So our first question is from one of my colleagues here at Notre Dame, and she's asking to Mr. Canny, Bill. Bill mentioned some resources, programs that are available to provide models and possibly funding for community sponsorship. And I would like to know if a list of those resources can be made available to participants. He also mentioned a volunteer coordinator is essential, and I would like to know more concretely what kinds of activities do volunteers help with? What are the most important contributions that volunteers can make to helping a new arrival get settled in the community? And I'm really grateful for this question because studying the refugee integration in Italy and in Europe in general, the question of accompaniment of volunteers, so a company who is accompanying refugees is essential. So it's a question that I'm asking everybody. What does it mean to accompany volunteers? Bill, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good question. I was a former volunteer director for a hospice program many, many years ago. And I was also a Peace Corps volunteer. And my understanding from those experiences, once someone is not sort of professionally paid, it sets up a whole different set of sort of attitudes, perspectives, and conditions that have to be, dealt with and managed. Therefore, the importance, I think, of, a very well-managed and well-monitored volunteer program. Volunteers do a number of things for newcomers. They help them acquire safe housing. They can help find employment. They can help with English language, membership in community organizations. They also offer specialized skills and knowledge not always available in-house at a service agency. Mentoring time with a newcomer's specific questions is very important to them. Access to social and professional networks to secure vital resources to thrive. Employers, as I mentioned, local civic and social groups. Finally, sponsors can mobilize in-kind and financial resources that fill important gaps for migrants, such as furniture or household items. But let me also say that we talk about what volunteers can do and what we can do for migrants and refugees and asylum seekers. We can't forget what they do for us. They provide us an opportunity to exercise our faith. They often give us an opportunity to have a wonderful personal experience with someone from other cultures. They offer us an opportunity to get out of ourselves, to be less selfish. So let's remember what we also get from the newcomers that we encounter. I don't have a list of sponsorship resources. Again, I would encourage people to go on to Refugee Council USA website. You might get a little more inkling of what's available. But there is one new program, as I mentioned. It's called the Community Sponsorship Catalyst Fund. And I know Open Society is involved. You could probably go on their link to find it. And also make a query with Refugee Council USA, or I myself could help you track down these specific sites where that fund is made available. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. What does it mean, Deacon Rudy, for you in Canada to accompany volunteers? Because after 40 years, I think you have a great experience on that.
Sure. Yeah, I guess it takes two levels of accompaniment. So one large, and probably represents the largest, is family reunification. So these are families here that want to sponsor and resettle family members overseas. And so they journey and are available with their family members when they are settled to Canada 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for multiple years. And so the accompaniment and support that has been provided to their family members is incredible. The same is true with our parishes, right, who are sponsoring strangers that we have named through our overseas missions. And so you have in our parish communities somewhere between 5 and 15 volunteers who, again, are available, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, to journey with their refugee family. And they do a tremendous job. If there's one danger that they can be, or one criticism, is that there's the danger of over accompaniment, that they love them to the extent that they are not allowing them to stand on their own 2 feet and to establish themselves and to gain independence. So this is always a bit of a tension point between us in our guidance to them. But the level of accompaniment, so when you look at integration outcomes between those that of the government assisted refugees and those of the private sponsored refugees, there was a study of the Syrian refugees that were brought into Canada. And what they found was that 90% of those that were resettled under the government-assisted program went on social assistance in year 2 and beyond. So 10% in that first year were established and and were independent. Contrast that to the private-sponsored refugees. 55% of those within their first year are self-sufficient, have established themselves, and are independent. And I guess the right question to ask is, why is that happening? And I guess the answer is, it depends on who you ask. So if I were to ask Immigration Canada, they would say, well, what we found is that the privately sponsored refugees have a higher level of education. And so naturally their integration outcomes would be much higher. And my response to the government would be, well, you have all the data available at your discretion to be able to tease out an apples to apples comparison, and then make that determination. But I will guarantee you, if they did that, you would find that the PSRs, the privately sponsored refugees, will remain having a much stronger integration outcome. And why? Because they're welcomed into a community, right? And that's the difference. With the government-sponsored refugees, it is one settlement agency worker helping between 15 and 25 families at one time. And so for the 60 minutes that they can afford to assist that family every week, versus the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year of support that the PSRs are receiving. It's a natural conclusion to understand why they would have much stronger integration outcomes.
Thank you, Deacon Rudy. We now move to another topic that is raised by one of our questions we received, is for Father Pat. And so we move to the border right now. So not accompaniment and integration, but is at the border the question. So Father Murphy, if we can comment more on the caravan coming from Honduras, because Cardinal Ramazzini this morning was telling us about the situation of the caravan moving now in Central America. So what will be the Mexican reaction is asked from the public, and could this be a manipulated political maneuver because of the US election? So is a political issue?
You know, some people say it is. I'm not convinced it's a real political issue. I don't think people are that organized. I think it's a spontaneous issue of wanting to come. The Mexican government will act as puppets for the US government. They put the National Guard at the border and they won't let people in. And that'll go on for a while, and then people will begin to cross on their own and in more dangerous ways. I don't think we're going to see caravans of thousands of people arriving, but maybe in drips and drabs. I know Bishop Ramazzini, and he's a wonderful man. He's very in touch with things. I think we're giving too much credit to Trump to organize the caravan for his political ends. In the first debate, if you could bear to listen to it, there was not mention of the word migrant or immigrant, and only God knows if there'll be a second debate. So I don't think so. I don't think he could use it if he wants, but if anybody has any common sense, they realize these people are not coming for political reasons. They're coming for life and death reasons.
Thank you, Father Pat. Now I'll move a bit to Europe again and ask Oliviero, especially. Last week there was this new pact in Europe that just came up and is about a solidarity mechanism introduced with this new, is called the new European Pact, released in September 23rd. If you just inform us a bit about what is this new challenge or new possibility or opportunity for Europe, the Europe countries? I know that there have been pushbacks from the Visegrad countries, Eastern countries of Europe. So what is the situation, and how do you see this new opportunity at the borders of Europe challenging Europe?
Thank you, Ilaria. I can't hear you very well. I don't know if you are hearing me well. It's okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, 10 days, 10 days ago, on September 23rd, the President of European Commission presented the new Pact on Migration and Asylum for Europe. It's a very complex document because there are within other 12 documents, including several legislative proposals. This pact is founded on three pillars. The first one is the cooperation with third countries on migration and development in order to decrease migratory movements. The second pillar is a fast border and return procedures to quickly distinguish between those entitled to protection and those not. And the third pillar, enhanced responsibility sharing within the EU for people in need of protection. So overall, I think that the pact is an opportunity to widen the European public debate on migration and asylum in a new perspective. It's important for me, but I think for all public opinion in Europe to focusing on Dublin regulation and on its overcoming. Because at the moment, as you know, probably due to the Dublin regulation, when refugees arrived in the first country, for example, in Italy or in Greece or in Spain, in the south of Europe mainly, they have to claim asylum in this country, they have to remain in this country, and this country have to start with the procedure. And so this is it's very heavy for all Southern Europe countries. And so this is the reason why these countries are asking to overcome the Dublin regulation. And at the same time, the other countries, in particular the Notre countries, don't want to overcome. So the public debate is focused on this. About the main elements of the pact, at the moment I can say that several proposals, as Caritas Europa underlined a few days ago, are not convincing. First one, as I told you before, the fast border and return procedures risks to not protect the rights of the people. It's not possible to say in a few hours if you can claim for asylum or not. The responsibility sharing mechanism is not convincing because the pact forecasts a voluntary relocation mechanism from the first country of entry to the other EU countries. So we know, and many of these countries already said, that they will not join this provision. They don't want people from the southern countries where they arrive. And so the idea to oblige these countries to receive these people is not in the pact. And we believe that it's important to have this kind of result, because the responsibility sharing must be the opportunity for all EU countries for a burden sharing. The pact will now be negotiated by the European Parliament and the EU member states, and in the meantime, the European civil society, even Caritas network, will participate at the debate, sharing its point of view, but it's important to follow this process, because at the moment we don't know if we can, we are going we are going to have an Europe and a European Union where the value of solidarity is a sharing value. So it's important through the pact to have this kind of result.
Thank you, Oliviero. We have a questions here to all the panelists. So I'm gonna ask you to everybody here. It's a question from the public, and it's asking, beyond the current models focused on resettlement, what role do you see for stakeholders like the UNHCR, the private sector, and faith communities in ensuring local integration and or return to countries of origin as alternative pathways? So it's a question for everybody. What is the role of the private sector and the UNHCR for local integration? Bill, do you want to say something?
Sure, I'd be happy to open up a little bit. I have some 4 years experience working overseas, actually in communities that are displaced, sometimes in their own country, but often in another country. And once a person crosses a border and for reasons of persecution, they become a quote unquote refugee. When they are within their country and have not crossed a border, we tag them with what's called an internally displaced person. And actually this year, the World Day for Migrants and Refugees from the Holy See was focused on internally displaced persons. But local communities in those situations often join with international actors like Caritas Italy, like Catholic Relief Services in the United States, like a number of Caritases around the world, Germany, etc., that will descend on that situation and support the local Caritas and local parishes and dioceses to offer support to the refugees in their areas and in their countries. It's critically important. You have to remember there are 3 pillars for resettlement and a durable solution, 3 durable solutions. 1, return to the country. And many organizations actually have return programs. In other words, when it's time for communities to return or refugees to return, you have to put in programs to assist them with local government. Secondly is integration in the country where they found themselves. And we have some great examples in a number of countries where refugees have been integrated into local communities. And then the third, actually smaller activity, is refugee resettlement. So there's a huge role for local churches and communities, the international community, and local governments and national governments to come together and hopefully successfully settle refugees for periods of time and help them to thrive no matter how long they're in those situations.
Thank you. Bill, any of the other panelists want to add on these interesting questions about the other stakeholders, the private sector involved in, for example, in integration?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I think UNHCR is helping us a lot. We have a great relationship with them. And some other really big private sector groups have supported along the border in many different ways. They always come to us to see what's happening, to see, some more help they can offer. More recently, they've been doing some renovating here at the house because, their whole refugee program is not for the same reason. There's just not a lot of refugees being able to be processed at this moment. And so they're really focusing a lot on the protection of refugees. And we have become great partners with the United Nations in this facet. I think the private sector is important. It's really key to the future because, as I said before, the governments really are just looking for what can benefit them politically rather than trying to help people.
Ilaria?
Yes, thank you, Father Pat. Yes, Oliviero?
Yes, I can say in our experience, the role of UNHCR, who is the main partner of the alternative pathways programs, is mainly on the procedure abroad. They, as you know, they are very active abroad, organizing camps and everything refugee needs, and partially they are active even in Italy for the procedures, but the civil society is totally involved in the welcoming and integration process. So in our programs, the Caritas network, in particular the dioceses, are totally involved in a reception system and in order to implement the integration processes.
Thank you, Oliviero. Deacon Rudy, do you want
Yes,
to?
please. Thank you, Ilaria. I think the church's role, and I think it was very beautifully articulated by His Eminence Cardinal Thomas Collins, is that for those who wish to stay in their homeland, and we see this in the Middle East through the Chaldeans and the Patriarch wishing the Christian community to remain in Iraq. For those who wish to stay, I think the church has a role to support them through organizations like the Catholic Near East Welfare Association, Aid to the Church in Need, and through other church organizations that can assist them to remain in their country of origin. And that has to deal with, the IDP situation that Bill had referred to. But the church also, as we've rightly heard through this forum, has a role to play in assisting those who cannot remain and those who have to flee to a safe country. With regards, and one further point with regards to the IDP situation, during that forum that the Migrants and Refugees section held a year or two ago on internally displaced persons, and it was very clear to me that the solution for IDPs cannot be resettlement to the West. The numbers are too large. 26 million refugees. On top of that is layered another 40 some odd million IDPs. And so the role that governments and private citizens should play here is on providing political and economic pressure to address the root causes of what has caused the IDP situation to occur. And I certainly want to commend President Trump and the work that they've done in the Middle East with the peace pacts, peace treaties that they've been able to negotiate. So I think that is a positive step forward. And I hope to see more of that in the Middle East to provide peace, to allow refugees to return to their countries of origin, which they want to. I mean, they want to, that is their home, and that would be the ideal solution for them.
Thank you, Deacon Rudy. I'm going to ask a question myself. It goes back to the point of accompaniment and to the point of resettlement of vulnerable refugees, because in resettling refugees that are vulnerable is not an easy task. they come with vulnerabilities, disabilities, is a high accompaniment, would say. So what does it mean to select vulnerable refugees if that could be a burden for the hosting society? Because this is one of the issues I'm always receive from host communities, that it's really hard when the vulnerabilities are so intense, so difficult. So what does it mean to receive these vulnerabilities?
Let me just tell you a little bit about the U.S. resettlement system with regards to that. First of all, I am very happy the way that our government goes about selecting refugees to come to the U.S. It tends toward the most vulnerable, the poorest, single mothers, all persecuted for various reasons, single mothers, those who have been persecuted due to their homosexual preference, for a number of reasons, including medical. And the agencies all have to provide a list each year of their ability to manage and help refugees with various types of vulnerabilities. And they'll often go into relationships with local hospitals or local institutions that are able to help them assist these refugees to resettle. So it's a fairly well-developed system in the US among the agencies, where you have to declare that you're able to take people with vulnerabilities, and then the system allows generally for refugees to be shuttled toward those agencies that have sort of the best systems in place. But it requires a lot of, again, community support, whether it's health, physical health, mental health, etc. It applies good connections with communities to assist those refugees with particular needs.
Thank you. And so we have right now, we have 5 minutes left on our, and it's difficult to connect all the questions because we have different and international panelists today. So I'll switch now to the border again, because there is a question for Father Pat about the, is there any coordination taking place between the Catholic Church in Mexico and in the US? What are the Mexican bishops doing about their government position on the Stay in Mexico policy? And another question is about Casa del Migrante. What do you limit the stay at your casa just for 40 days?
Well, let me answer the easy one, the 40 days, before I get in trouble with the bishops. 40 days is because we have so many people who need a place to stay. And so we're limited to 60 people because of COVID. So 40 days sounds cruel, but it's not. A lot of people leave in 20 days, they get jobs. The economy is booming in Tijuana. We've had people walk in the Casa on a Monday and Tuesday, they're working. There's lots of construction and a lot can be done. So 40 days is not a problem. What can I say about the bishops? On a national level, there is a good, we call him the coordinator for human mobility, a good bishop in charge, and things are moving along. There's a lot happening in terms of conversations and education. You know, on a national level, I think there's a lot of movement between bishops as well around the theme of immigration. And I think, you know, they're limited by COVID. On a local level, it's hit and miss. One of the best places where a lot happens is El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. There seems to be a good connection between the bishops on both dioceses and also in New Mexico as well. Those three dioceses, they have a long history of working together. I would say bishops make some nice statements. Sometimes they're important, and sometimes they need to be more in touch with the reality of what's going on the ground. Moral support is nice, but it'd be good to have a visit. There's no such thing as refugee resettlement programs for the Mexican bishops. The refugees, we don't have to worry about choosing them. They choose us when they knock on our door.
Thank you.
Laura, if I could add to that just a little bit, there is a document put out by the Mexican American bishops in 2004, Strangers No Longer, which actually forms the basis of how we approach asylum seekers in our two countries. And it's certainly only in a theoretical approach, but it does provide us some policy. There is also, and I think Father Pat knows this, an initiative called the Tex-Mex Bishops Meeting. And the bishops along the border of Texas and Mexico meet regularly 2 or 3 times a year to try and get a little closer and perhaps do some things together that would be mutually beneficial. We do have regular contact with the Mexican Bishops Conference, sort of conference to conference. And as Bishop Pat goes, at times, bishops in cities across the border, I think, do attempt and certainly could do more to work together.
Thank you, Bill. We have 1 minute left. I don't have space for everybody to give a final remarks, but I'll ask just one person. I'll ask Deacon Rudy to give us a final call of action for complementary pathways from now to the future, and for general community sponsorship. What is the call for action for the future for Canada, Europe, and the US?
Thank you, Ilaria. I'm just so thrilled about seeing the church is alive and active in the sphere of migrants and refugees, and the resettlement of refugees in this forum is a beautiful testimony to that. And my call to action is simply to continue the good work that everyone that the church is actively engaged in, to the extent that you can leverage the talent of time, talent, and treasure of regular citizens to get involved in private sponsorship is a fantastic initiative. Certainly would encourage throughout the world in the West to model themselves after the best of what we have brought to the world. And my last and final comment is, please remember, there are many from many faith backgrounds that are persecuted, but remember, especially I would ask the Christians who are suffering most of all.
Thank you for saying that. That is crucial. And I really thank you all, my guests today, the panelists, to joining us in our conference. And I wish that, and I hope that you're gonna stay with us this afternoon for the rest of the conference. Thank you so much for your participation, and I hope to see you soon.